Good morning, good afternoon, hello everybody, wherever you are in the world, whatever time it is, welcome to the final of the 4 book launch live panels on the For Flourishing's Sake book launch extravaganza. And today's is so exciting because it is the day that the paperback has finally come out. So it's here in physical format, available for everybody to get their hands on. I'm beyond excited to be with you here today, and I have a fantastic panel of educators who will be introduced to you shortly. And I also have the wonderful Andrew Cowley with us here today, who's the author of the Wellbeing Toolkit and the writer of the foreword to For Flourishing's Sake. And he's very kindly agreed to chair today's panel so that when we start, I can just relax and take part in the panel as a panelist rather than have to chair as well. So thank you very much. And we also have the brilliant Rebecca Osborne with us. You will see this appearing from time to time as it develops. She will be live illustrating for us again. So welcome, Rebecca, and thank you very much for doing this again. So watch out for the fantastic illustration as it develops. Now, when it comes to introducing the panel and Andrew himself as well, I'll leave Andrew to do that with the panelists, but I'll start off by telling you a little bit about the book and myself and why we're here today. So I am Frederika Roberts. I'm the author of For Flourishing's Sake. And when I'm not writing, I am speaking, training, and also occasionally lecturing at postgraduate level on positive education and character education. Before that, I was a teacher. So many years ago, before I changed careers, I was a teacher, and I'm absolutely passionate about making sure that well-being is at the heart of education so that we can have education communities that truly support the flourishing of children and everybody in those communities. Hence the book, For Flourishing's Sake. We'll be with you for the next hour to discuss not just the why, because if you're watching this, you're probably quite interested in the why and you know it, but really the how. How can you bring positive education and well-being and character development into schools? And that's what the panelists are here to discuss with me today, and how they've done their amazing work in their respective settings. So For Flourishing's Sake is published today, and it's available from all the major retailers of books all over the world. So get your copy today. Just search for Flourishing's Sake. I will tell you at the end as well, and I'll show you as we go along, a link where you can get one of a limited number of copies that are personalized and signed, and for a 10% discount as well. So watch out for that link coming up as well. And it wouldn't have happened without the contributions of today's wonderful panelists, and of course all the panelists that contributed to the previous panels, and those contributors to the book that haven't been able to participate in panels. So thank you so much to all of you. Thank you so much also for Andrew for writing the wonderful foreword to the book, and to everybody who read pre-publication copies to write the endorsements that you'll find inside the book and on the book cover. Thank you so much. And of course to the wonderful team at Jessica Kingsley Publishers as well. None of this would have happened without all of the support to everybody who's actually contributed to making the book happen. So thank you, everybody. So I'll hand over now to Andrew to chair this panel, and enjoy. Hope you find it useful, and I'll have a quick word with you at the end again. But other than that, I'll relax as a panelist and take part. Thank you. Over to you, Andrew.
Very much, Fred, and good afternoon, everyone, and good morning to one of our panelists. Julie has joined us from Hartford Magnet Trinity College in Connecticut in the USA, and it's breakfast time over there, so I hope you have had some breakfast, Julie. We're glad you've joined us. We're expecting Paul Bateson. He's got one or two issues with his tech, I think. But when Paul joins us, Paul is from University of Huddersfield, and he's a teacher, writer, and PGCE tutor. And we also have Dan Morrow. Dan and I know each other from our workplaces, and Dan is currently CEO of the Woodlands Academy Trust, but will be moving on to ventures new fairly soon. So, For Flourishing's Sake, when Fred contacted me about this, would I be interested in writing the foreword? It was 2019. No one had heard of social distancing. No one had heard of COVID. Things have changed rather. So, first question is, how are we? Julie, how are you?
Great question. If you asked, it's kind of like the weather in New England. It changes all through the day, but we're just about to open up school, and it's a combination of logistics and looking at how we're going to be infusing positive education within a virtual and hopefully throughout the year in-person school.
That's great. Paul, you're with us. How are you?
Hi, yeah, I've finally arrived. Sorry about that. Yeah, good, thank you. Yeah, glad to kind of be here. I thought I was going to have to duck out then for a second, but I managed to figure it all out.
Excellent. Dan, how about you? How are you doing?
Very well. I'm actually down in Dartmoor, which is the trust I will be leading from January. I've realised this is one of the most beautiful areas in the country, and also very, very wet. But that's all good. Like Julie, we're very much thinking about the reopening of schools and how we ensure that positive education is embedded in the processes, systems, and structures. But obviously, during this pandemic and COVID, having actually positive education embedded in culture has probably without doubt been one of the huge benefits of how we've been able to operate as a team.
That's fantastic to hear. And Fred, how are you? Excited?
I am very excited. Yes, it's been a long time coming today, and actually delayed because of the pandemic. It was supposed to come out as a paperback today in June, along with the Kindle. So very excited. But a bit like everybody else, you know, there's a lot going on in education at the moment. And oh, we've got a little bit of echo. And I think, although it's been really disruptive and really heartbreaking in so many ways, I'm actually also quite excited about what this pandemic could do for education, because what it's done is it's forced us a little bit to look at what we're doing in our practices, and it's, I think, opened up more eyes to the importance of well-being for everybody in education. So, and not just education, of course. So I hope that this can act as a catalyst for change.
Fantastic. Right. Well, we've got a number of questions. We've been hinting at some of those in our introductions. So first question, it's quite broad. What do you understand by positive education? Paul, I'm going to start with you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's a lovely phrase, isn't it? And you know, throughout the book, it's kind of, you know, there's perhaps different examples, and it's kind of defined in different ways. But I guess I've always defined what I do as child-centered. You know, that's for me, that's positive, where positive education starts from. And I think it also is quite well summed up when you look at the timetable there, and you've got the different subjects that are all boxed off in secondary school. Certainly, for me, like positive education's the things that aren't there in the timetable, the kind of the cracks in the boxes, if you like.
Fantastic, thanks. Okay, Julie, how about positive education your side of the Atlantic? Is it different from what we view it in the UK, or are we singing from the same hymn sheet?
Well, it's really, for me, rooted in the positive, like positive emotions, engagement, relationship, meaning, and accomplishment, and health. And it's needs to come across in our practices, how we take care of ourselves as adults, how that then gets transferred over to students through our own role modeling, and also through explicit instruction within the day. And that's why everyone needs to get this book, because there's ways that you can see how people may be doing it, doing positive education and taking it to another level. So I'm happy.
That's great. And your students are up to the age of 18. Am I right in thinking that?
Yes, I'm in a grade 6 to 12 school now. And when I met Fred, I was in a pre-K to 8 character education themed school. So it does look different across the ages, but it's I'll let everybody else talk and get more specifics in another question.
Okay, Dan, being in charge of a number of schools, how's positive education looking for you? and your colleagues?
I think it goes back to, well, I think it goes back to Julie's point actually about the model that Fred proposes in the book around LEAF, the Learn and Flourish. I particularly like the idea of that double helix, the idea that positive education is actually about the holistic approach of bringing the academics with the well-being and character without discerning some kind of hierarchy between the two, but actually seeing them as both symbiotic and synergistic with the goals of an overall holistically positive education for our children. And I think, as you know, Andrew, for the work we do together in our local authority and more generally, we do discreetly teach character education, and we also look to the culture of positive education. And I think it is that mixture of tangible and intangible. But equally, I would suggest that in those most testing times that we faced recently, it's where the benefits have really shown in terms of care, resilience, compassion, and an approach which is not based on judgment, but is based on trying to both liberate and really, as Fred would say, help everyone to flourish within the circumstances we find ourselves in.
Thank you. Okay, now Fred, you wrote the book. What's positive education all about?
Oh, now if I just said I don't know, that would be an interesting one, wouldn't it? Well, like everybody said, there's all the elements are there, really. I mean, Dan referred to the double helix, and that's the double helix that IPEN, the International Positive Education Network, use. And I really like that as an overall kind of framework to explain what it is, because that double helix is on one hand academic education, and on the other hand it's well-being and character strengths development. And it's really when you put all of that together that you get that holistic approach that everybody here has talked about. You know, nobody here would say that well-being is the sole purpose of education and that we should forget about academic stuff. It's about how the two feed off each other. And actually, if you want people to flourish overall, which includes academically, not just while they're at school, but also when they leave school, and if you want the entire school community to flourish, then it's about putting those puzzle pieces together. And there's so much research that supports that if you look after the well-being side of things and the character development, then the academic success actually follows anyway. So it makes absolute sense even from that point of view to support well-being. So that's where I see positive education, and I really see it as a bit of a shift in how we educate. It needs to be explicit, it needs to be implicit, it needs to be modeled, it needs to be through the academic subjects. And what I really hope is that one day it's no longer a distinction between saying positive education, character education, well-being in education, but that we just talk about education and it includes all of these things.
Yeah, some very pertinent points there, and the sort of key things that have come out from that first round of questioning is relationships, health, care, resilience, positivity, and holistic nature, everything. Julie held up your LEAF model, which is a very powerful model there, Fred, of the holistic nature of what education should be. Right, so on to the next question. We've partly started addressing this already. So are educating for character and educating for well-being one and the same, or are they different? And should it be at the expense of academic progress or not? Dan, do you want to start us off on that one?
Well, yes, just the first thing I want to do is challenge your question.
Yeah.
Because it's a false dichotomy to suggest that by promoting a holistic model that would be at the expense of academic progress. And I think that kind of hierarchy is perhaps one of the reasons why we often talk in quite a binary, as if they are either or. And actually, I think it's very, very clear it is an and that. For me, the difference between character and well-being is actually about lexicon, language, and how we potentially approach that culturally, both in perhaps the United States, Britain, and other Western countries, where they're seen as perhaps interchangeable terms, so the way that positive education and character education can be as well. But there are some nuances and distinction underneath. What I believe very strongly is that well-being is about a state of mind and a state of existence, and therefore about someone's ability to represent their present. And character is about ensuring that we are in a growth mindset, looking at some of those traits, habits, behaviors, and expectations that lead us to be self-actualizing and therefore flourishing. And therefore, they have to be seen as both parallel and, in fact, intersecting lines of approaches, because you can have very, very, very successful pupils academically whose well-being is in a terrible, terrible place. Equally, you can have some people who have excellent well-being whose academics is not therefore supporting that well-being and character actually to be effective and sustaining in the long term. So again, I do come back to that double helix. I don't think we can divorce two concepts which are clearly linked. And just very briefly, I would suggest that in our discrete lessons around character, and then in our approach using well-being coaches, and therefore the academic approach, they're almost like three sides of a triangle, and they need to be held always in both tension but also supportive tension with each other in order to ensure the child or the family or indeed the staff member who's at the centre of the triangle is therefore always at that centre and isn't outsided by some kind of reductive accountability or some need to put a tick in the box.
Thank you, Dan. I know you're really passionate about this from what I know of you and Bexley. Julie.
Yeah, that is definitely a loaded question. And let's see, what can I add to that? I think that, first of all, absolutely well-being and positive character development in the areas that were just described are essential for positive school culture and also for academics. And an example in school of how it might be different is, we start our day at HMTCA, that's the acronym for our school, and at Breakthrough also in the morning with a mindful moment. A lot of schools have started to do that. And so that would be an example of how to promote well-being, being present, intentional awareness. And then character is, I think, reflected through our intentions and developing our skills, and that's when we're put to the test in the activities that we do. I think that character in that kind of cliched description of thoughts, actions, habits, then develop into our character. That negative or poor character can sometimes be a reflection of cumulative negative behavior that may be done as a result of some shortcomings that people don't know how to resolve. So in schools, it's the perfect place to get the foundation set through both well-being and character development.
Fred, I turn to you for that one. What do you think? Separation of character and well-being, or are they natural bedfellows?
I think they're definitely natural bedfellows and definitely support the academic achievement rather than undermine it in any way. I actually look at it from a positive psychology perspective, and actually character development and character strengths form one of the big building blocks of positive psychology and how we look after our well-being. So there's research that supports that both generally working on your character strengths, knowing what they are, knowing how to recognize them, knowing how to develop them in oneself, and also spotting them in others can enhance well-being, but also there are certain character strengths that particularly support well-being. So strengths like hope, for example, gratitude are some of the ones that are particularly associated with supporting well-being. So developing those in an educational context is really important. So I see almost character development as an element of a bigger picture of positive education, and that all sits within the context of positive education as a whole school endeavor, which then brings in all of these other things which are also character strengths, for example, like leadership as well. So it all fits together in lots of different and complex ways. And I think if you take one of the elements out, as Dan was referring to that triangle, you know, you start seeing that something starts to give and something starts to get a little bit wonky. So you really need all three. You need the academic, you need the character, you need the well-being aspect. And once you put all of that in place, then it really, they all nourish each other and they all feed off each other and support flourishing in all aspects.
Okay, and then finally, if I turn to Paul there. Now, Paul is as a PGCE tutor. How do you emphasise character and well-being for your potential future teachers?
I mean, firstly, I agree with what all the other speakers have said. You know, that they really are intertwined, and you know, it's very interesting, isn't it? The kind of the as you said, the loaded question about it: is it at the expense of academic progress? And I'd say definitely not. You know, for me, well-being's about being happy and healthy in order for you to explore your character, which for me, you could read the word values in the place of character. But, you know, as Fred said, you know, character and having strong values will undoubtedly enable you to be well and happy and healthy. So there is a bit of a chicken and egg element to the question. Going back to my kind of timetable analogy earlier, you know, there's no reason why, you know, maths lessons and science lessons should not be including elements of character and of values and of well-being in those lessons. And that's what we kind of teach on the PGCE at Huddersfield. You know, yes, we're on a secondary. I'm teaching on the secondary PGCE, so we're all subject specialists. But you know, we've all got a duty and we've all got an obligation to weave these things into our own curriculums. You know, it's not at the expense. And people look at that curriculum and say, "Oh, there's no time for a discrete session on character," for example. And I would say there is, and I know there's plenty of schools out there that are doing that. But even if there isn't, you know, it comes in your own subject. It should be planned in to your own subject as well.
Thank you, Paul. Right. Okay, I know we've got people watching us live on YouTube and on Facebook. Just a reminder to anyone who is doing so, and you've got your another device to hand, to use the hashtag #FlourishingEd to share your thoughts on the panel discussion so far. Right. So, challenging question. Let's try this one. Will positive education work anywhere and in any setting with any age group children? Fred, would you like to start us off here?
Put me on the spot, why don't you? Yes, the answer is yes. What I really set out to do in the book was to show exactly that. And that's why I was really keen when I interviewed contributors to the book to speak to people from different schools. So whether it was independent schools, whether it was state-funded schools, whether it was primary, secondary. I even interviewed somebody who's implemented positive education in higher education settings and in different countries all over the world, because I really wanted to show that this is not something that only happens in certain types of schools. I think sometimes positive education has been seen as being something that only happens in high-end independent schools, and that's really where it started. If you look at Geelong Grammar School in Australia, if you look at it's gone Wellington College, that's it, over here in the UK. You know, those are the schools that have been associated with the start of what's known as positive education now. But really what I wanted to show is that this has been happening all over the world in lots of different types of schools, and quite often schools with very small budgets as well. So it's not something that's only available to people in fee-paying schools or in certain countries. What we do need to do, and that's one of the elements of the LEAF model that's been shown by the research to be really important, is to adapt what we do to the cultural environment. And that's the cultural environment in a specific country, for example, but also each school, each educational setting has its own microculture. So you can't just take something that works in one school and transpose it into another and expect it to work exactly the same way. You have to take the cultural environment into account, and you have to adapt what you do. So in that context, as long as you do that, then yes, it can and will work anywhere.
It does, and indeed, for people who are going to buy the book and invest in it, we go from Geelong High School, we go to Wellington College, we dip down into our corner of southeast London as well as one or two other locations. So a very, very diverse range of schools being covered in the book. Okay, Paul, how about you? Will positive education work anywhere?
I think so. In my experience, I've seen it work. I work in a primary school regularly, and we've been working to do what I just talked about in terms of weaving these values through the regular curriculum, and the response has been brilliant. I've seen the same at secondary school with projects that I've run, and I talked about the kind of angle that we take at teacher training level as well. I think I'd agree with what Fred said though. There's got to be some context, because not all schools need the same, and not all students need the same. So a project that I run at a school, for example, was in response to a certain issue. I felt like we needed to teach kindness to these children, and another school that might not be something that's at the top of the list, so that the project or the kind of focus might be different, but absolutely it can work across the board.
Thank you, Paul. Okay, let's head over to Julie. Now, Julie, what do you think positive education can work anywhere?
Oh, I know that it can, and I guess the thing that's interesting in my personal experience is that I was fortunate enough to join a school founded by a teacher who, that was her complete intention in creating Breakthrough Magnet School, was in developing a school that promoted positive character development before positive education had a name. And by creating the mission and the vision and the values and promoting those explicitly and implicitly, I've seen it for myself, and I've seen how it can work. And actually the cumulative effect, starting from a 3-year-old, and as they get up in years, what that looks like and how that lands. And now I'm in a grade 6 to 12 school where it was not necessarily intentionally or as self-aware in its creation as a school, and we're going to make it more self-aware. And so I think any educator or school leader, the positive education elements are already present in your school, in your mission and your vision, in everybody's why. And this book, especially that Fred put together, by the way, I do love that you get to travel around the world in the book through the different schools, is really neat. But you can see how to make what you're doing intentional so that you can get actual results. And that's something that I focus a lot on, is setting a goal for well-being that we measure through a Likert scale that we then can tweak more intentionally as a result of having those things in place. So I know it works, and it's something that I'm also excited to see continue and expand globally. Thanks to Fred and this great book. You really have to get it. It's a great roadmap.
Thank you, Julie. Okay, and finally I'll turn to Dan. Now, Dan, I know that you've got a background in children from EYFS 2 right through to secondary. Do you think it can work anywhere?
Absolutely, and really want to echo what Julie just said, firstly about the book, but also I've seen it and I know it can. I mean, what I find really interesting is if you really think about positive education, that's what the early years experience for our children and the curriculum is all about. It's about not trying to silo those aspects of character, well-being and academics as we look to the holistic child. One of the difficulties in the British education system as we go through it is that we can sometimes then see a hierarchy of academics overtaking that sort of character well-being. To reference what Fred said at the beginning, it does feel that some of the independent sector understood that first. And we probably in the last 5 to 10 years have been in a bit of a paradigm in the UK where positive education was almost for the privileged few. And actually our model was suggesting the majority just needed to be academic as the way out. And I think that sort of reductive thinking is now being challenged when we see that without that focus on the double helix and the sense that well-being and academic health is inextricably linked, we do not get to the point where we see children who go on to flourish outside of settings where that isn't the case. And a good example is, if we take just an academic approach, say, for example, at high school, then we see dropout rates, huge dropout rates at university, because we haven't given the character and well-being for those children to succeed in the long term. And therefore, for me, yes, it can and will succeed everywhere when it has the culture to support it, because actually that is what a genuine depth of education looks like. And it's also what serving our moral and vocational purpose is all about.
Okay, thank you very much, Dan. Right, well, we are halfway through. It's 1 o'clock UK time. For those of you catching up on YouTube at some point in the future, it might not be. But here we are in August 2019, still in the midst of a global health emergency. Things have changed in the world a lot in recent months. Obviously, we've got COVID-19, but we've also had highlighted inequalities, social and economic, particularly with events in the United States and the Black Lives Matter agenda. Inequality is perhaps more obvious now than it has been for some time. So the question to panelists now is, what's priority, if there is a priority? Is it the children who are falling behind, or should the priority be on mental health and well-being? Julie, can I start with you?
I saw that coming. It is an interesting challenge to look at how to make everything a priority, right? Everything is important. We're about to start our school in a couple of weeks after 6 months of being apart from one another, and the bedrock of the success for this school year has to be in our focus on well-being and safety, as well as continuing the momentum that got started shortly after we started distancing, after the murder of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery and others. We're coming back. We'll be coming back together, and actually this school year, 2 initiatives that we're going to be focusing on are both on making positive education more intentional through our mission and values, and through teacher training, as well as our advisory, and embedding it, all of the things that you see in the book for Flourishing's sake, but also in our racial equity and awareness. Also starting with teachers, developing that awareness, and then also promoting and providing students with a voice to continue to get to know themselves better and to speak up and speak out and make change from the racial equity standpoint and from an anti-racist standpoint. So they go hand in hand, and positive education actually promotes and makes it less, it's uncomfortable for people, but makes it a little bit less intimidating to be uncomfortable as we need to grow. And the only way to do that is to be able to be courageous and to take on some really difficult institutionalized problems that we have in our systems.
Okay, thank you, Julie. Okay, Paul, how would this pan out for you, particularly in terms of training new teachers?
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to see a world where, you know, there was no real decision in terms of coming back to school now, where people are saying, oh, should we do more health and well-being now, you know, now that we've had a tough time. I'd like to see a world where that was already happening, and it had already equipped everybody, you know, to deal with the difficulties as best they could. However, you know, I think, and Fred talked about this earlier, you know, happy children do well, and they've not even missed that much school, in my opinion. It'll really vary students' experience of what's been happening while they weren't in school, and that's something that needs looking at very, very closely. In terms of, you know, diving back and just starting to drill children with content because we think they've fallen behind, I think we'll just create problems further down the line. And Dan referred to that as well in terms of when people turn up at college and university. I think it'd be crazy to go back to school and ignore the COVID virus, or to ignore Black Lives Matter protests. And that's something that I advocate at teacher training anyway, you know, to teach in context as much as possible, you know, not least to engage students in what you're teaching about, but to prepare them. And it'd be crazy to ignore that, in my opinion. I've seen during lockdown, teaching key worker children at primary, they needed that space to explore what was happening. So most of my sessions were based around, you know, I think the statue got pulled down in Bristol over the weekend, and you know, Monday morning we were doing a session on it. I think that the students need some time and space to explore what's happened, and that'll make them feel well, so they can then go on and catch up in it, if you'd like to use that phrase.
Yes, that's why I very deliberately put falling behind or catch up in quotation marks. It's a very ill-defined term, isn't it? Okay, Dan, how about you?
I personally think there's two things at work here. Firstly, anyone who's watched the A-level and GCSE exam fiasco, quite frankly, where essentially there was a message about prioritizing academia, if you like, over the pastoral care for a generation, and we saw the mental health impacts of that and where it leads, and quite rightly, eventually a change which actually starts to redress that. But I think for me, it's about that sense of outsiderism, and I think Black Lives Matters and a whole sense of actually structural exclusion of lots of different minoritized groups. There's a fatigue and a sort of sense of exhaustion, I think, with a number of minoritized groups, that they've been fighting within a system so long without finding redress or even always people who wish to listen. And therefore, this is an opportunity. I believe it's more than an opportunity, actually. It is an absolute moral imperative to draw a line in the sand that says it isn't about this or that. Because, you know, going back to training, it's Maslow's hierarchy. Without the safety and the security, we cannot get to self-actualization. And, you know, those who wish to take an agenda which is purely knowledge-based or based on an aspect of that can talk about self-actualization as the goal, but we can't put the cart before the horse, because children, or any learners actually at any point in their lives, coming at a situation without that foundation of processing, whether it be emotional or whether it be, you know, intellectual, they're all processing issues, and therefore, again, trying to find hierarchies on those makes a mistake of not looking to individual children and individual needs, and that clearly has to be a very personalized and bespoke approach as we go forward, because no one has had the lockdown experience or the pandemic experience. Each experience is unique, bespoke to context and circumstances, and our job is to work out what is in those backpacks and then start to unpack them for each and every child. And actually, just before then, we have to do that first for our staff and colleagues who have had different experiences, different losses, different griefs. And in order to ensure both the academic and mental health success of our children, we need to first ensure the mental health of all of our colleagues and staff as an absolute priority and with real intention and care.
Thank you, Dan. Okay, Fred, over to you on that question.
Yes, I mean, so much has been said, and I like Dan's analogy there of unpacking that backpack, you know, because children do not come into schools in isolation. And I think, as everybody has alluded to, you know, this over-reliance perhaps on the academic is quite dangerous. And as Dan mentioned, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you know, children can't learn if they feel unsafe. So we need to start with where they're at. As a wonderful book contributor Kelly Hannigan quite often says, you know, start where everybody's at, and where everybody's at will be different, as Dan said, for everyone. Everyone will have had different experiences of lockdown and of the pandemic. So you need to take that into account. And the beauty of positive education is making space as well for people to talk about their emotions, and that's not just the children as well, it's the staff. They don't live in a vacuum either. You know, they come into school, and we put them in charge of our most precious people in society, which, you know, parents put their children in their hands, and we need to make sure that staff are well enough to teach those children as well, emotionally as well as physically. So we have to address the well-being piece, but I think it goes even further than that when we actually consider that, you know, maybe we only think that they have so much catching up to do because we are teaching to exams and we're teaching to grades. And actually, if we consider what we're trying to achieve through education, surely that is to produce young adults that can go out into the world and stand on their own 2 feet, and that have the resilience and the moral character to make society better, to contribute to society, to work, to study, to do whatever it is they move on to when they leave our schools. And doing that is not something that can just be measured by a grade in an exam. So if we actually look at the holistic aspect of educating children, it's about so much more than academic learning and exams at the end of it. I'm not saying that exams don't have their place at all, they do, but it's about much more than that and the bigger picture. And if we look at the bigger picture, then actually, what have these children learned while they've been going through the pandemic? What have they learned while they've watched the Black Lives Matter movement, while they've watched what's been going on around the world? They've learned an awful lot about what it means to be a responsible citizen. They've learned an awful lot about what it means to deal with trauma, to deal with difficulties, to deal with challenges. How can they take that learning and bring it forward into their lives as they go forward and into their wider education? And actually, if you look at it that way, they haven't actually missed an awful lot. They've probably learned so much more in the last 6 months than they would have done if they'd just been at school for that time. So I think taking that approach, we can safely focus on making sure that they're well enough to learn, and actually take maybe the opportunity to look again at different ways that they can learn, because I think this is going to be with us for a long time. So, you know, learning doesn't have to just happen in the classroom. There are lots of blended approaches, lots of self-directed learning, and maybe one of the things we need to focus on more is giving children the tools, the skills, and the confidence to be able to self-direct their learning as well, and find out information without just having a teacher standing at the front of a class or in front of a computer screen to feed them that information, so that they are equipped to deal with that, whatever a pandemic throws at us going forward.
Yes, thank you, Fred. Yes, indeed, it's a little disappointing at times to see some dismissal of things like the trauma or struggles that children will have when they return, because it's been an unusual 6 months. And we're still partly through it. Okay, very more specific question next. Can we teach kindness, and how would you see it being done? Dan, can I start with you on that one? Can we teach kindness, and how do you do it?
It's a really tricky one, to be fair, because I think a lot of this comes down to definitions. And I was interested in, and partly because of the publication of a book, actually, I followed up some of the research. I think it was Lopez et al., who were looking at how character is really hard to find a societal kind of common ground, so we can become subjective in schools. Well, even more so kindness, I would suggest. And I think kindness is a really important character trait and value, and therefore it is part of character, in my opinion. I think, and Andrew, this is my own opinion from Twitter, I think sometimes kindness, though, can become in itself a little bit of a straitjacket to challenge, and there needs to be an acceptance within kindness of it's the approach we take, but it doesn't mean, quite frankly, just becoming in a place where we don't actually challenge things that aren't acceptable, and we give too much credit actually to opinions over facts. And I think sometimes we've got to use kindness as the double helix, which is it's about both an intelligent and an emotional response to each other, because it actually relates to relationship. Relationship is based on trust. That trust is formed through connection, and therefore it's valuing each and every connection and how we connect with each other to make sure it's both authentic and real. And sometimes failures of kindness can be interpreted, but actually it's a failure of relationship. And sometimes that must be allowed, because we don't always all get on, and that's fine. But kindness is accepting and respecting someone's different viewpoint, and the fact that maybe that's just a viewpoint I don't wish to engage with.
Yeah, good point. Thank you, Dan. Julie.
Kindness can absolutely can be taught, and it's actually essential that we teach it. And it starts with self-care for our teachers. Being kind to ourselves in all of the ways that help us to be healthy, in order to allow us to be our best. And kindness, the way it's taught, I think, again, I really go back to a phrase that I like a lot that landed well for me, which is that character is better caught than taught. So how it is taught is both implicit and explicit through role modeling of from our teachers, but also taking time to promote the skills that go into kindness that include some mindfulness, include helping students in the younger years to make eye contact, to use I messages when talking about disagreements, to make someone's day. And there's a lot of science that's coming out to back up the benefits of kindness, both from the one who's providing it and the one who's receiving it. And we know that it can be taught, it needs to be taught, and it needs to be taught in the way that can be done intentionally and planned, and also in teachable moments. Sometimes the best times to teach are when kindness has not occurred, and how do we correct that through different ways of communicating, through restorative practices, through the use of circles and methods that help us to slow down and really appreciate the benefits of what it feels like when kindness is more part of the culture within a classroom in a school.
Okay, thank you, Julie. Paul, how about you? Can kindness be taught?
I think so, certainly, yeah. And I think it's really important that we do that. It's interesting what Dan was saying. You know, there is it's quite difficult to kind of reach a consensus on what is kindness or what's the best way to be kind. But if we take that as an umbrella term for self-care, as Julie talked about, you know, benevolence, altruism, compassion, trust. You know, these are things that do need to be taught, and you can teach them in different ways. Demonstrating is one way, might not be taught explicitly all the time, and it needs to be practiced. I think is the key thing. So we, you know, when children are learning to tie their shoelaces, or you know, learning how to brush their teeth, we show them, and you know, we don't just expect them to know how to do it. And I don't think that we can expect that kindness is somehow intrinsic in everybody, unless it's practiced. So I think, you know, restorative practices are one way of demonstrating that in schools, for example. I think we need to allow children, you know, places to practice kindness. When I was little, we had a little animal house in primary school, and everybody had to do a bit of looking after the animals. And that we were learning compassion there, and we were practicing it. And we might not have had that opportunity at home or anywhere else. So it's providing places to practice it, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. Okay, Fred, to round off with you, can we teach kindness?
Yes, I think we can and we need to. I think it goes back to, if you think about parents and we teach children to say please and thank you. And when I interviewed Flora Barton, for example, for this book, she made a great example about how everybody that visits her school, Crowmarsh Gifford Primary School, comments on how well behaved and polite the children are. But she was saying the politeness is not just about please and thank you. It's actually about being kind and respectful, because once you teach children that, then it's not just about saying things like please and thank you and seeing that, but it's actually about what does it mean. If you say hello to somebody, you ask them how they are and you actually want to hear the answer. You give people space to tell you how they are, to tell you how they're feeling. You listen to people and engage in what they're saying. So all of these things are part of everyday basic kindnesses. And then of course it goes beyond that, and it goes to what we were talking about earlier in terms of Black Lives Matter. We need to teach children and lead by example and show them what it means to be inclusive and to be kind to other human beings, regardless where they come from, what color their skin is, or whatever. We're all human beings and we need to extend that kindness and respect to each other. And we do that by example, as Julie mentioned, character being caught, and we do that through role modeling. So one of the ways, yes, we do teach kindness explicitly, but we also teach it through the role modeling. So it has to start with the adults in school, and we have to model that in our behaviors. And a great way as well to show kindness is through recognizing other people's character strengths and commenting on those. We can build that into everyday conversations with each other as adults and with children. And it's a great way to role model kindness, to say to somebody, you've shown great perseverance in this task. That's a great character strength to demonstrate. How else can you do that? You have shown great leadership today, or I love how you demonstrate your appreciation of beauty and excellence in your artwork, or in recognizing other people's artistic creations. You can build that into conversations. And I think with what Dan was saying earlier on about, not using kindness as a straitjacket to let things fly. I think that's really important. We've seen it again in the UK at the moment with what's been labelled as a refugee crisis, and it's been hyped up by the right-wing media, and where's kindness gone? Where people who are having to put themselves in danger to flee to somewhere safer, and people are losing their lives in the process. And then you see comments on right-wing media websites where people are saying, oh good, I'm glad these people have died, it'll teach the others. It's horrific. We have to show by example that this is not acceptable, and being kind does not mean just accepting those kinds of opinions or those kinds of comments because we don't want to be rude to somebody. Being kind, I'm reminded of Michelle Obama, and she's came back to that this week. She was talking about what she said in the past about when they go low, we go high. And she said this week in a speech that going high does not mean ignoring what is unacceptable. Going high actually means challenging what's unacceptable, but doing so in a manner that is respectful. And that comes back to learning and teaching children to respectfully disagree and to respectfully point out evidence and facts, and not just rely on opinion, as Dan was saying earlier. So kindness can be taught, and being able to debate and discuss in a kind way, in a respectful way, is also something that can be taught.
Yeah, thank you, Fred. And we're obviously here to talk about your book, Fred, but one thing, I don't know if other people have been reading this summer, but Humankind by Rutger Bregman is an excellent book on the subject of kindness. Right, we have time for one more question, and no pressure. You have 45 seconds each to answer this one. What is your dream of the future of education? Julie.
Well, since it's made my last 45 seconds, I just wanted, my dream is to see positive education as equally as important as academics, and it is. It's a double helix. So for students to be much more part at the forefront of developing our curriculum and owning schools, and for everybody to realize what their purpose is, for students to love to come to school. And I just want to say thank you so much for inviting me to join this conversation, and to Fred for writing this book. It really helps. It will help start a conversation within your school. I know I'm looking forward to using it to inspire our staff, but just to keep personal development is essential to any kind of academic progress, which then will help our students to enter the world fully ready to engage as citizens and professionally and as parents and family members. So that's my dream.
Thank you, Julie. Okay, Dan, over to you. What's your dream for the future of education?
Well, it's Julie's dream, actually. we dream the same dream. It is exactly that. But I suppose my point as well would be to have a better understanding collectively of our holistic responsibility for this as a philosophy of education. And if we were to just go back very briefly to, say, for example, there's too much focus sometimes on those representatives of minoritized groups. There's an expectation that they are the ones who have to do the work. They are the ones who need to be the change and act for change. We all have to be the change, and we all have to take responsibility. And therefore, my dream is that we all see ourselves as learners to create the circumstances and an environment for success where everyone flourishes. And so education is a personal but societal endeavor.
Thank you, Dan. And Paul, over to you. What's your dream for the future?
Yeah, similar dream to everybody else. I'd like to see children in school, rewarded for kindness, not just cleverness. I'd like to see schools rewarded for that as well, and look at the way that schools are graded, because as long as schools are judged on their exam results, we will have a real disparity in what different schools are providing. And I think if there's different factors brought in much more explicitly to the kind of inspections of schools, I think we'll naturally see things change.
Thank you, Paul. Okay, and Fred, perfect timing. 2 minutes to go. Over to you to round everything off.
Very expertly chaired. And I will round off in a minute, but I'll answer your question. And then before I round off, I will ask the question of you as well, Andrew, to kind of, what's your dream? Because I'd like to, I think the audience needs to hear that as well. But my dream really is, as I said at the beginning, that one day maybe we won't have to have terminology to describe well-being, positive education, character education, but that all of it will just be education, and the education will just have changed. That's what I'm working very hard to do, and that's what I really hope to see in the future. So before I round off, I'll just hand back over to you, Andrew. I'd like to see if you can share what your dream is for the future of education.
Yeah, so I'd very much like to see pretty much what everyone else is doing. Let's erase those boundaries between what is well-being and character and academic progress, and just think about the whole child. That holistic approach is what makes the child that emerges at the other end. And it's very interesting meeting former pupils. They don't remember getting the level 4 or the level 5 under old money. They remember the funny things that happened in class, the things that they were taught to do, the models and examples that they were set. That's the real depth of education, to make them the young people that we want them to be. So that's where I'm coming from.
Thank you so much, Andrew. And what a nice way to round that off. You know, if we think about education, what will children remember years after they've left school? And it's not those grades, as you rightly said. It's the experience they had. It's the teachers. It's the friendships. It's the people. So why are we only focusing on one element? Absolutely. And well, thank you very much, Andrew, for expert chairing and bang on time there with this panel. And thank you very much. I can't believe this hour has been and gone already. I'm sure we could have all carried on for ages. It's been such a fascinating discussion to have, and we've yet again only scratched the surface, but hopefully it's been really useful and insightful for those of you watching live and for those of you watching the replay after today as well. And you can watch the replay of this panel, but also of the 3 preceding panels which took place on the 18th of June when the Kindle launched. You can watch all of those if you just search for Flourishing's Sake book launch on YouTube. You'll find there's a playlist with all the replays on there, so just search for that and you can watch them all back. And they're also being replayed half an hour at a time on the For Flourishing's Sake podcast every week at the moment as well, so look out for that. And of course, remember to buy your copy of For Flourishing's Sake to go far more in depth than we have been able to in the panel today and the previous ones. You can get it from all the major book retailers worldwide, but if you do want a 10% discount and one of just 25 signed personalized copies, there are just a few left. You can go to the link that's down here, bit.ly/signedbookfr. Watch for the capitalization of the letters as well. So right there, bit.ly/signedbookfr, and you can get your personalized copy. You can order directly from me for a 10% discount while I still have some. So make sure you do that. Once you've read it, I'd love to ask you for a favor. Books live and die on reviews, really. If you want more people to see the book and get it and make a difference in education, please leave a review on Amazon, which is where a lot of people do buy it. And that will really help more people see the book in their suggestions, etc., when they're looking for well-being books. So please leave a review, even if it's just a 1 sentence or even just a star rating. It really helps. So thank you so much for that. So all that remains for me to say is a huge thank you again to our panelists, and that's of course Dan Morrow, Julie Goldstein and Paul Bateson, and to the fantastic Andrew Cowley for his brilliant chairing of today's panel. Thank you so much. It's been very relaxing for me just being a panelist rather than chairing. And a huge thank you, of course, to Rebecca Osborne as well for the brilliant illustrations today. So it's been fabulous having her with us through all of these panels. And thank you for watching. Thank you for being interested in making education better, because that's what it's all about. So thank you, everybody. I will now go off and have some dinner. And we've got some more comments on social media, so I'll just have a look at those. Oh, there you go. So Siobhan, who's been watching, wishing me good luck with the book. Thank you very much, Siobhan, and thanks for your comments throughout. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for being here today. And I'll see you again soon, and have a great rest of the day and great weekend.